The story begins in stillness. Long before kingdoms, before names, before even the first flicker of ambition, the world lay quiet beneath an eternal shroud. This was not silence as we know it, for silence carries the memory of sound. This was something deeper, something older, a hush so complete that the very thought of change seemed impossible. The world of the age of ancients was defined by one quality above all: stasis. Vast arch trees stretched endlessly, their roots twisting into one another in a labyrinth without beginning or end. They rose as if to prop the sky itself, their bark hard as stone, their crowns shrouded in mist. Between them lay oceans of fog, neither day nor night, where light was not born and darkness not yet named. Here, amidst that endless fog, dwelt beings as timeless as the land itself, the everlasting dragons, armored in stone scales, wings like slabs of iron, and eyes that had never seen death. They moved with the same patience as mountains shifting in the wind. To the dragons, time was not a river, but a still pool, without ripple or current. They did not grow, they did not wither, they did not die, they simply were. It is difficult for us, bound as we are to change and decay, to imagine such a world without the concept of seasons, without dawn or dusk, without the fragile beauty of beginnings and the bittersweet hush of endings. But this was the age of ancients, an eternity of grey stone, still trees, and dragons whose very breath seemed eternal. And then, something new appeared. No one can say from where it came. Some whisper that it rose from the depths of the arch trees, others that it erupted in the hidden caverns beneath the fog. Whatever its source, it was unlike anything the grey world had known. It was fire, the first flame, a single point of brilliance, fragile yet profound, that cracked the monotony of stone and mist. Where once there had been only sameness, now there was division. The flame birthed opposites. Heat stood against cold, light against dark, life against death. The cosmos, once still, was now split into contrast. The flame did not roar, it did not conquer. It burned quietly, but with a truth the world could not ignore. It revealed possibility, and in doing so, it revealed mortality. For what is fire, if not the promise that one day it will dwindle? The age of ancients had no words for such things, but the world itself felt the tremor. What had been eternal could now be finite. What had been infinite sameness could now become story. And so, as the flame burned, it called. It did not call with voice or gesture, but with presence. And those who lingered near it felt its pull. The everlasting dragons, proud in their stone scales, turned away. They had no need of change, no hunger for newness. But others, creatures dwelling in the shadows of the arch trees, figures half-formed, wandering in the grey mist, sensed the flame's promise. They felt the fire's warmth, and they reached for it. These were the first lords. From the first flame, they drew forth fragments of its soul. And with these fragments, they were transformed. One claimed a soul of searing brilliance, a radiance like lightning breaking a storm. Another drew forth a shadowed power of decay and disease, a mantle of bones and endings. A third seized the secret of fire's creative force, binding sorcery and flame together. And one, overlooked and unseen, grasped a different soul, small, deep, and quiet. This last was the dark soul, destined to multiply, to divide, and to flow into the fragile lives of mortals. The age of ancients could not have known it, but in that moment the world's stillness was over. The fire had been found. The wheel of history had begun to turn. The first flame did not simply illuminate the world, it fractured it. Where once there was one quiet eternity, now there were paths, choices, conflicts. Where once there was only being, now there was becoming. And the lords, with their newfound power, would not remain content in the fog. They would rise, they would fight, they would remake the world in their image. But in that very promise lay the paradox of fire. It warms and destroys, it illuminates and blinds. It births life, but it carries within it the quiet certainty of its own fading. The age of ancients was not ended yet. The arch trees still loomed, the fog still clung, the dragons still waited in their stone dominion. But the hush was no longer eternal. For in the heart of the world, fire burned, and with fire, destiny. And so, the tale of the Four Lords of Cinder begins, not with conquest, not with empire, but with a hush disturbed by a single flame. The hush of stone and mist was broken. The silence of eternity had fractured, and soon the world would never be the same again. The first flame burned quietly, a solitary beacon in a world that had never known contrast. It did not shout nor demand, it simply was. And yet, in its still warmth, it stirred desire. Among the formless beings who wandered beneath the arch trees and through the veils of fog, some felt the pull more strongly than others. These few, drawn to the fire's brilliance, came close. They reached into its light, and in that moment they were changed forever. From the depths of the first flame, each drew forth what we call a Lord's soul. These were not fragments of ordinary fire, but echoes of its primal truths, vast wells of power that mirrored different aspects of the world itself. The first to claim was Gwyn. Tall, stern, and radiant, he reached into the flame and found a soul of piercing brilliance. Lightning coursed through him, searing away the grey stillness that clung to his form. From that moment, Gwyn carried with him the light of the sun, and in time, he would wield it as weapon, hurling bolts of thunder to shatter the eternal dragons. But in this first hour, he was simply transformed, clothed in light, his very being reshaped into a beacon of flame's radiance. Another figure, darker and slower, came forward. This was Nito. In the flame he did not find warmth or brilliance, but a burden more quiet, more inevitable. His soul was the soul of death itself, the first death, the first ending. Wrapped in shadows and clothed in bones, Nito became the keeper of endings, the harbinger of decay. His gift was not a sword or bolt of light, but the certainty that all things must wither. Where Gwyn blazed, Nito lingered. Where Gwyn shone, Nito whispered. Yet both were bound by fire's truth. The third was the witch of Izalith. Where others took light and death, she sought creation. Her soul burned with flame's generative power, the raw energy of transformation. In her hands, fire became sorcery. It could be shaped, woven, and called forth in torrents. She did not simply wield flame, she multiplied it, experimenting with its essence, binding its heat into new forms. For her, the flame was not only a gift, but a craft, a secret to be explored and expanded. And then there was one more, a figure small, quiet, and easily overlooked. So easily overlooked, in fact, that their name is remembered only as a title, the furtive pygmy. While Gwyn's radiance dazzled, while Nito's shadow loomed, while the witch's sorcery flared, the pygmy bent low and took from the flame a soul different from all others, the dark soul. It was not grand in appearance. It did not blaze or roar. It was subtle, quiet, and deep. Where the others embodied singular powers, the dark soul held within it a secret capacity. It could divide, and divide again. In that division lay the seed of humanity itself, the small flames carried in the hearts of mortal men and women who would one day fill the world. Thus, the flame birthed not only the lords, but the pattern of the ages to come. Gwyn carried brilliance, Nito carried death, the witch carried creation, the pygmy carried division, humanity, and shadow. Each of these souls reflected a truth of the first flame, and in carrying them, each lord became something more than they had been, something capable of shaping destiny. But with power comes choice, and with choice comes consequence. The lords, though newly made, stood on the threshold of change. They could not remain in the shadow of the arch trees forever. Their souls burned too brightly, too heavily to allow them stillness. For a time, the world remained hushed. The dragons still flew above the fog, indifferent to the changes below. The arch trees still stood unmoved, their roots entwined in endless stone. But the lords were restless. They bore in their hands the power to fracture eternity, and they would not keep it hidden. There was a question, though it had no words yet. If the flame had given them strength, what was that strength for? The answer would not come in contemplation, but in conflict. For the flame had not simply birthed opposites, it had birthed the possibility of war. And in time, the lords would turn their eyes upward to the everlasting dragons. The dragons were timeless, unchanging, armored in stone, untouched by death. They embodied the world as it had always been. To the lords, newly filled with the restless energy of fire, this stillness was no longer eternity. It was tyranny. To seize their souls was to seize the right to act. To act was to fight. The lords had not yet spoken of conquest, but already the flame whispered its truth. Power demands use. And so, quietly, inevitably, the path toward war began. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. We have seen how the first flame was not kept untouched. From it, 4 souls were drawn. Gwyn's radiance, Nito's death, the witch's fire, and the pygmy's dark soul. Each carried a fragment of the flame's paradox. Soft forward tease, yet what is power if not tested? The lords would soon turn their strength against the dragons, and the world would shudder beneath lightning, fire, and betrayal. The world had changed. The hush of stone and fog, once eternal, now trembled beneath the quiet stirrings of the first flame. The lords, each carrying a fragment of its power, could no longer remain in stillness, and so they turned their gaze toward the sky, where the everlasting dragons soared above the fog in timeless dominion. The dragons were the last echo of the age of ancients. Their scales, hard as mountain stone, reflected neither light nor dark. Their wings, vast as the heavens, moved with patient inevitability. Their eyes, ancient and unblinking, bore witness to a world untouched by the passage of fire or death. They were timeless, and yet, in the eyes of the lords, they were impermanent, susceptible to force, to cunning, to the restless energy that now flowed within those who had touched the flame. Gwyn, radiant with the brilliance of lightning, led the charge. He did not roar, he did not shout. His bolts tore through the grey mist, striking scales and stone alike, revealing the dragon's vulnerabilities beneath their apparent invincibility. With each strike, the world seemed to tremble, not with alarm, but with the inevitability of change. Nito followed in silence, his presence a whisper upon the wind. From him emanated mists of disease and decay, subtle yet inexorable. Where the dragons walked, bones began to crumble, and flesh weakened beneath an unseen weight. Nito's power was not a blaze, but a slow and patient undoing, the certainty of endings that even immortality could not resist. The Witch of Izalith brought fire of a different kind. Her flame did not merely illuminate. It created, it multiplied, it transformed. Forests near battlefields caught in her torrents, turning wood into ash, yet also imbuing it with sparks of strange life, seeds of sorcery that would linger long after the dragons had fallen. Her fire was chaotic, creative, dangerous, and beautiful all at once. And then there was Sif, the scaleless dragon, a figure whose envious heart could not abide, the perfection of his kin. He turned from his own, revealing the secrets the others could never have guessed. The dragons, once eternal, were not beyond defeat. Their perfection was brittle. Their silence could be shattered. With Sif's betrayal, the path to victory became possible. It is difficult to imagine the stillness of eternity giving way to conflict, yet that is precisely what occurred. Battles stretched over valleys and mountaintops, lightning clashing with stone, decay creeping like mist, fire erupting in torrents across the skies. The dragons fell, not in one instant, but gradually, inevitably, as though the world itself had decided that their time had ended. The lords did not revel in triumph. There was no exultation in the fall of creatures so ancient, so complete. Instead, there was recognition. The world had shifted. Its old order was gone. In its place, a new age, one defined by fire, by contrast, by the power now held in the hands of those who had dared to reach into the first flame. And yet, even in victory, the flame whispered its paradox. Creation carries destruction, brilliance carries shadow, life carries death. The dragons were gone, but in their place rose responsibility, burden, and the quiet realization that the world's stillness had been broken forever. The age of ancients had ended not with a roar, but with a hush disturbed, lightning across stone, mist curling over decay, fire blossoming across the earth, and one betrayal whispered in secret. The world would never again know eternity, and the lords, though triumphant, now carried the weight of shaping what would follow. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. We have witnessed the first lords reach toward power and confront the everlasting dragons. Gwyn's light, Nito's death, and Izalith's creative flame, aided by Sif's betrayal, shattered the eternal stillness and ended the age of ancients. With the dragons vanquished, the world lay open, no longer shrouded in eternal mist. The hush of stone had fractured, and in its place rose motion, possibility, and the quiet expectation of order. Among the lords, one now turned from war toward dominion. Gwyn, radiant with the brilliance he had drawn from the first flame, became the architect of a new age. He did not claim power with words, nor demand allegiance through fear. His radiance, like lightning distilled into warmth, drew others to him. The first of his followers were not mere mortals. They were warriors of fire and light, beings attuned to the brilliance he carried. They would come to be known as the Silver Knights, guardians of the new order, embodiments of sunlight and discipline. Gwyn's dominion took shape in stone and marble, a city that seemed impossible even in the imagination of the gods themselves. Enor Londo rose, its spires piercing mist, its halls suffused with quiet light. Sunlight was law, not only illumination, it was a principle, a framework by which the world might be ordered, a slow and steady assertion that radiance could impose harmony upon chaos. In the streets of the city, each footstep echoed on polished stone. Each shadow was measured and accounted for. The city itself seemed to breathe in time with the rhythm of Gwyn's will. Within this domain, the lords and their followers found purpose. Gwyn's children, both of flesh and of soul, became instruments of his order. They embodied the flame's brilliance and were entrusted with maintaining its cycle. Yet beneath the light, subtle tension stirred. For the flame, though warm and sustaining, was not eternal. Its brilliance, if left unchecked, would fade. And when it faded, even the mightiest would be tested by the inevitable encroachment of darkness. In the quiet hours, when the city lay hushed beneath the stars and the wind whispered through golden spires, Gwyn pondered the nature of his gift. Fire could create, and it could destroy. Light could warm, and it could burn. Order could protect, and it could oppress. These truths were not new, yet they demanded contemplation. The act of ruling was as perilous as the act of fighting, for to impose structure upon the world was also to shape its decay, to write the script of consequence with every command. Yet for now, Anor Londo stood as testament to triumph. Towers gleamed, gardens bloomed in artificial harmony, and sunlight seemed to linger longer here than anywhere else. In this city, the power of the first flame was concentrated and celebrated, a living monument to victory and stewardship alike. The Silver Knights patrolled its streets, disciplined and patient, their polished armor catching the dawn in glints like distant stars. Even as Gwyn established dominion, the other lords pursued their own paths. Nito remained in his shadow tombs. The Witch of Izalith experimented with creation, and the furtive pygmy disappeared into obscurity, carrying the quiet weight of the dark soul. Yet Gwyn's influence stretched beyond Anor Londo, shaping kingdoms, alliances, and the very rhythms of the world itself. Still, the flame whispered its paradox, for light cannot endure forever. Order carries fragility. Brilliance invites shadow, and the brightest cities often cast the deepest darkness. These were seeds that would grow, unseen at first, beneath marble floors and gilded halls. In time, they would test the prudence and resolve of the Lord of Sunlight. For now, however, the hush of the world had been broken, not by noise or fury, but by radiance. The age of fire had begun, its first dawn bathing stone and mist, tree and fog, in a soft and steady light. The dragons were no longer eternal, and the world, for all its stillness, would now know motion. In Anor Londo, the city of impossible splendor, Gwyn walked among the silent courts and the golden halls, aware that he had not only won a war, but had claimed responsibility for the fate of all living and unmoving things alike. The flame's brilliance burned within him, and through him it would burn across the world until the slow and inevitable march of time reminded even the greatest lords that fire does not last forever. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. The dragons have fallen, and Gwyn, radiant with the first flame, establishes Anor Londo. Sunlight becomes law, his silver knights guardians of order, and the age of fire quietly begins. Soft forward tease. Yet while light rises, shadows linger. Beyond the city, Nito waits, embodying the quiet inevitability of death, and the world prepares to feel the weight of his presence. While Gwyn shaped light and order in Anor Londo, another Lord of the Flame withdrew from the brilliance of conquest and established dominion of a quieter, more inevitable sort. Nito, the first of the dead, carried a soul distinct from all others, not radiance, not creation, but the certainty of endings, the slow, unyielding pull of decay. Nito's presence was subtle, almost hidden, yet no less profound for its quiet. He moved through the world like a shadow upon dust, a whisper through bones. The lands he claimed were vast and silent, littered with the remains of what had once been. Tombs rose, not in the splendor of stone and marble, but as monuments to mortality, crypts that stretched deep into the earth, their corridors echoing with hush and stillness. In these darkened halls, the weight of inevitability could be felt by any who lingered too long, a pressure neither cruel nor vindictive, but absolute and calm. From his resting place, Naito's power extended outward like mist. Disease and decay followed him as naturally as fog drifts through valleys. Mortals who approached felt a quiet chill, the soft warning that all things must pass, all bodies must yield to the slow rhythm of entropy. Even the land itself seemed to respond to his presence, soil crumbling more readily, bones buried in layers of ash and dust, and the quiet groan of earth carrying the song of endings. Yet Nito did not act with cruelty. He was not a tyrant nor a monster. He was the first reminder of mortality, a guardian of balance. Where Gwyn's light illuminated possibility, Nito's darkness preserved inevitability. His silence was deliberate, his vigilance eternal. Through him, the flame spoke of both beginnings and endings, for the cycle of life cannot exist without the quiet hand of conclusion. The first flame had granted him dominion over death, but Nito's purpose extended beyond mere observation. He was a teacher of limits, a calm presence in the vast theater of change. Mortals who encountered his domain learned restraint, humility, and the subtle truth that every spark, however brilliant, will eventually fade. The Lord of Death's realm was hushed, suffused with the stillness of inevitable passage, and yet within that quiet lay a strange serenity. While Gwyn's Anor Londo glimmered and the Witch of Izalith experimented with the generative fire, Nito's tomb, of the giant stood as a quiet counterpoint. It reminded the world that fire, for all its brilliance, cannot banish the shadow forever. That one moment of creation is inseparable from the long, slow drift towards stillness. Nito, first of the dead, kept watch, patient and eternal, for he understood the rhythm of the flame better than any other. From the hush of his tomb, he observed the world beyond. The light of Anor Londo shone like a distant star, a brilliance that drew admiration and envy alike. Yet for all its radiance, Gwyn's city could not escape the reach of death. In time, the lessons Nito embodied would ripple outward, touching all who walked in sunlight and whispering the inevitability that no fortress, no throne, and no soul can endure unchanged. Even now, as the world settled into the new age of fire, the quiet certainty of the first of the dead held sway. Mortals might dream of glory, of endless light, or of dominion unbroken, but Nito remained a calm reminder. Endings come to all, slowly, quietly, without alarm, and without fail. The lords, though powerful, were not free from consequence. Gwyn's brilliance might warm and illuminate, but it could not stop the approach of shadow. The witch's experiments with fire might birth new wonders, but they too would face entropy. And Nito, patient and still, watched the cycles begin, a quiet guide for the mortal and immortal alike. Thus, while kingdoms flourished and cities shone, the first death walked beneath stone and ash. He did not announce his coming. He did not strike with fury. He existed as a truth, and that truth was inescapable. Life, no matter how brilliant, bends towards stillness, and the first flame, for all its fire, carries within it the seed of inevitable decay. And in that quiet, Nito waited, the first of the dead, for the moment when light and shadow would meet again, when fire's brilliance might stumble against the calm patience of mortality, and when the world would feel the weight of his silent dominion. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. We have now met Nito, the first of the dead, who embodies the inevitability of mortality. While Gwyn establishes radiance and the witch explores creation, Nito quietly preserves the rhythm of endings. Soft forward tease. From death comes the seed of new flame. The Witch of Izalith will soon explore creation itself, testing the boundaries of fire in ways both wondrous and fragile. While Gwyn built cities of sunlight, and Nito presided over the quiet inevitability of death, the Witch of Izalith turned her gaze inward, to the very heart of the first flame. She did not seek dominion over men or kingdoms. Her ambition was subtler, more profound. She saw understanding, and in that understanding, the power to create. Izalith's soul had drawn from the flame its generative essence, the raw energy of fire, not yet shaped, not yet constrained by law or limit. She perceived that fire, while destructive, carried within it the potential to birth worlds anew. Where Gwyn's brilliance illuminated and Nito's shadow ended, she saw the delicate space between, the fertile hush from which new forms might emerge. In her hands, flame became malleable. It was not a weapon but a craft, a quiet art of transformation. She experimented in hidden sanctuaries beneath her city, weaving fire into shapes that defied expectation. Trees burned yet sprouted again. Stones glimmered with sparks of life. Ash drifted not to bury, but to fertilize. Creation and destruction danced together, entwined in an endless rhythm, like the quiet breathing of the earth itself. Her experiments were not without risk. The first flame, though generous, is paradoxical. Creation always invites imperfection. Fire, if unrestrained, consumes itself. Izalith sensed this, but pressed forward, believing that mastery over the flame could give birth to a new age of abundance. She sought to multiply its brilliance, to scatter fragments of its power across the world, seeding life where there had once been only mist and stillness. In these hidden hours, mortals glimpsed her power only rarely. Those who wandered too close to her sanctums found themselves touched by sparks of impossible fire, and even fleeting contact left them altered. A seed might take root in the soil where their foot had tread, or a flicker of flame might linger in the mind, whispering understanding of the world's hidden rhythms. Yet these effects were subtle, quiet, often imperceptible, as if the very world itself carried her hand in its slow, deliberate unfolding. Izalith's work carried a paradoxical serenity. She labored without haste, aware that creation, like fire itself, cannot be rushed. Each experiment, each spark was a meditation. Even as the world outside the arch trees felt Gwyn's light and Nito's shadow, she persisted in a calm, deliberate rhythm. Her dominion was not measured in victories or conquests, but in quiet, incremental transformation. And yet, the flame's paradox always lingered, for in multiplying fire, she risked losing control over it. The generative power she sought to harness could not be contained indefinitely. The more she experimented, the more fragile the balance became. Creation and destruction, inextricably linked, moved closer together. A single misstep, a single spark left unchecked, could unravel all she had built. Still, she pressed on. Her vision extended far beyond the immediate. She imagined a world teeming with new life, shaped by the quiet hand of fire. Each experiment was an offering to the flame itself, a subtle assertion that understanding and care could guide even the most dangerous power. And in this pursuit, the Witch of Izalith embodied the delicate truth of the first flame. Brilliance alone is not enough, and dominion requires both wisdom and restraint. In the hush of her sanctums, the world seemed to hold its breath. Fire danced across walls, curling into shapes both familiar and strange. Sparks drifted like embers of thought, illuminating the possibilities that existed only at the threshold between light and shadow, life and death, order and chaos. Thus, while Gwyn established cities of sunlight and Nito presided over the inevitability of mortality, Izalith labored quietly to shape fire itself, to understand its rhythm, to coax from the flame new potential. Her work was unseen by most, yet its influence would ripple across the world, shaping events in subtle and profound ways, touching mortals and immortals alike. And even now, as her experiments continued, the first flame whispered its quiet warning: power that seeks to create must always respect the stillness from which it arises, or risk consuming itself entirely. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. We have followed the Witch of Izalith as she embraces the creative paradox of fire, experimenting quietly to shape the first flame's generative power while balancing the risk inherent in creation itself. Soft forward tease, yet not all who touch the flame seek understanding. In the shadows, the furtive pygmy carries a fragment of the dark soul, destined to shape humanity in ways subtle, profound, and eternal. While Gwyn illuminated cities and Nito presided over endings, and Izalith experimented with creation, the furtive pygmy remained quiet, almost invisible, carrying the smallest fragment of the first flame, the dark soul. It was not brilliance, nor death, nor generative fire, but a subtle, multiplying spark, capable of dividing and seeding itself endlessly. In that quiet division lay the future of mortals, the unseen inheritance of humanity. The pygmy moved among the remnants of the age of ancients with deliberate care. His power was quiet, nearly imperceptible. Unlike the lords whose presence altered the world with thunder or shadow, his gift spread in whispers, in hushed currents, and in the faintest glimmers of life. He understood that smallness can conceal profundity, that subtlety carries the potential for change without the need for overt force. Where the flame had given Gwyn radiance, Nito death, and Izalith creation, the pygmy's dark soul introduced a new principle, multiplicity. From a single fragment could emerge countless sparks, each carrying a portion of the whole, capable of independence yet inherently bound. In the quiet recesses of the world, the dark soul divided again and again, seeding the potential for mortal life. These sparks would later dwell in human hearts, carrying ambition, resilience, fear, and hope in equal measure. The pygmy's dominion was subtle, unremarkable in appearance. He did not claim cities or tombs. He did not craft wonders from fire. Instead, he observed the world and guided its first mortals, not through command, but through quiet influence. Those who drew near felt inspiration they could scarcely name, an almost imperceptible nudge towards survival, ingenuity, and endurance. It was a power that did not demand recognition, yet shaped the course of life for generations. In this way, the dark soul contrasted with the other lords. Gwyn's radiance drew loyalty through awe. Nito's shadow demanded respect through inevitability. Izalith's fire inspired fascination and caution, but the pygmy's gift required nothing outwardly visible. It worked in silence, in the spaces between more obvious dominions. It worked in hearts, in choices, and in the quiet courage of beings too small to claim attention. And yet, the dark soul carried paradox. Though subtle, it could multiply, and multiplication brings unpredictability. From small sparks emerged unintended consequences. Mortals, once infused with portions of the dark soul, would act in ways unforeseen, sometimes challenging the authority of the mighty, sometimes preserving it. This quiet force, unassuming though it was, would ripple outward, touching kingdoms, decisions, and fates in subtle, enduring ways. The pygmy understood restraint. He did not seek glory. He did not shape cities or crypts. He moved like the hush of wind over valleys, leaving traces of potential, knowing that the future is written in countless small actions rather than grand decrees. Where others demanded the world's attention, he cultivated the unnoticed roots of possibility. In this quiet work, the pattern of humanity began. Mortals would inherit fragments of the dark soul, and with them, the capacity for free choice, for ambition, for suffering and resilience. The pygmy's gift was at once humble and profound. It lay not in grand gestures or spectacular displays, but in the potential for life to endure, to multiply, and to confront both brilliance and shadow with agency. Even as the other lords solidified dominion over light, death, and fire, the pygmy's influence drifted outward like mist, almost invisible yet inescapable. Through it, the cycles of kings, heroes, and civilizations would come to pass, each touched by the quiet inheritance of the dark soul. It was a reminder that power need not blaze to matter, that smallness may seed eternity, and that the course of the world depends as much on subtle influence as on lightning or flame. Thus, while Gwyn governed Anor Londo, Nito presided over death, and Izalith pursued creation, the furtive pygmy laid the foundation for humanity itself, a quiet, multiplying power that would endure long after kingdoms rose and fell. And so, the Age of Fire continued, a tapestry woven from brilliance, shadow, creation, and quiet multiplicity, each thread essential, each consequence unfolding in hushed inevitability. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. We have now seen the furtive pygmy embrace the dark soul, planting the quiet, multiplying potential that will seed humanity, a subtle yet profound inheritance alongside Gwyn, Nito, and Izalith. Soft forward tease. As the first sparks of humanity awaken, the flame itself begins to flicker, and the world faces the fragile challenge of sustaining fire through the cycles of power, mortality, and creation. The first flame, though brilliant and sustaining, was not eternal. Its light, once steady and commanding, began to waver. It flickered softly at first, a subtle quiver at the edges of perception, almost unnoticed beneath the glare of Anor Londo and the shadow of Nito's tombs. Yet for those attuned to its rhythm, the change was unmistakable. The flame, source of brilliance, life, and creation, had begun to fade. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, perceived this as a quiet urgency. In the halls of Anor Londo, the polished stones seemed to hum with imperceptible tension. Light no longer lingered with the same certainty, and shadows stretched a little longer across the spires. The brilliance that had shaped cities and inspired loyalty was waning, and with it came a subtle recognition. Order is fragile, even in the presence of power. Elsewhere, Nito's tombs pulsed faintly with the same rhythm. The inevitability of endings remained, yet even death, eternal as it seemed, acknowledged the flicker. Mortals walking among bones felt the hush of impermanence differently. The decay that Nito presided over had always been gradual, patient, inevitable, but now it intersected with uncertainty, as though the very universe had begun to reconsider the patterns it had long maintained. Izalith, in her sanctums, perceived the first consequences of the flame's faltering. Her experiments, delicate and intricate, relied upon a constant and steady energy. Sparks that had once danced predictably now faltered and scattered. Fires meant to create new forms occasionally consumed themselves, leaving ash where potential had once thrived. In quiet contemplation, she realized that creation is not solely the act of will, it is dependent upon the rhythm of the source itself. And that source, the first flame, wavered. Even the furtive pygmy, whose dark soul had quietly seeded the first sparks of humanity, sensed the subtle shift. Mortals imbued with fragments of the dark soul carried the potential for greatness and resilience, yet they too were bound by cycles. The flicker of the flame introduced the first uncertainty into the inheritance of life. The pygmy's influence remained subtle, guiding without forcing, reminding that even small sparks must be tended if they are to endure. From this convergence arose the first cycle of the world, a pattern that would repeat endlessly. Light must fade, shadows must grow, creation must falter, and mortals must endure. The Age of Fire, as it was known, was not linear. It was cyclical, a rhythm that entwined brilliance, shadow, and quiet multiplicity. Each lord, in their domain, contributed to this pattern. Gwyn's light illuminated the way. Nito's endings reminded all of limits. Izalith's creation explored new possibilities, and the pygmy's dark soul seeded resilience and choice. These cycles were subtle at first. Seasons changed imperceptibly. Rivers altered their courses by inches. Mortals adapted to small shifts in the natural world, unaware of the underlying rhythm set by the flame. And yet, these cycles carried significance far beyond observation. They established a principle that would endure for all time, a structure beneath the apparent chaos, guiding the rise and fall of civilizations, the spread of knowledge, and the fragility of power. The lords themselves were both participants and observers. Gwyn sought to extend the light, maintaining the city and the order he had created. Nito accepted the slow growth of decay, understanding that even as the flame faltered, endings were inevitable. Izalith's experiments became more cautious, measured, attuned to the subtle ebbing of energy. The furtive pygmy continued his quiet work, planting sparks of potential in hearts and minds, aware that humanity's resilience would be tested by the cycles of fire and shadow alike. And so, the first flame flickered, introducing the concept of impermanence into a world that had once seemed eternal. The Age of Fire was no longer a static moment of triumph, but the beginning of a slow, rhythmic dance, where light and shadow, creation and decay, order and subtle multiplicity intertwined in endless motion. Mortals, once observers, now carried fragments of this rhythm within themselves, and the stage for future ages was quietly set. This was the birth of cycles. It was not heralded with trumpet or alarm, but with the gentle acknowledgement of change. The world, for all its beauty and power, was subject to ebb and flow, and in the hush of observation, the first understanding emerged. To hold the flame is to hold responsibility, and to witness its flicker is to perceive the endless repetition of consequence and renewal. The lords, their powers distinct yet intertwined, stood as the architects of these patterns, each contributing a vital thread to the tapestry of eternity. And as the world adjusted to this quiet rhythm, a deeper understanding began to settle into mortal hearts. The flame, though it fades, will always return, and through each flicker and dimming, the potential for life, choice, and endurance endures as well. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. The first flame has begun to flicker. Cycles of light, shadow, creation, and mortality are born, linking the domains of Gwyn, Nito, Izalith, and the furtive pygmy into an enduring pattern that shapes the world. Soft forward tease. And as these cycles take root, the first mortals awaken to inherit the flickering flame, their lives destined to echo the eternal rhythm of light and shadow. As the cycles of fire and shadow settled into quiet rhythm, the world began to hum with new possibility. From the subtle influence of the furtive pygmy, the first humans stirred, beings neither of brilliance nor of death, but carrying within themselves fragments of the dark soul. In these sparks lay not only life, but the quiet awareness of choice, the ability to endure, and the tender knowledge of mortality. The first humans awoke in a world shaped by the Lords. Sunlight from Gwyn illuminating their paths, death from Nito reminding them of limits, and fire from Izalith hinting at creation and transformation. Yet these influences were external, distant, felt as presence rather than command. What made humanity distinct was the inheritance of the dark soul, a seed of potential that could grow in innumerable directions. In its subtle rhythm, mortals learned curiosity, ingenuity, and restraint. They began with simple acts, the recognition of fire as warmth, the shaping of tools from stone, the observation of life and death in quiet patience. Each action, though small, carried the weight of legacy. For the first time, mortality was understood not as sudden ending, but as a rhythm, a gentle progression through which choice mattered and consequence was felt. The flicker of the first flame was mirrored in their own fleeting lives, teaching endurance, attention, and adaptation. The pygmy guided them quietly, not with command nor with instruction, but through subtle shaping of potential. Those who listened carefully to the whispers of the dark soul discovered ways to survive, to cooperate, and to learn. Small communities began to form, not imposed by power, but nurtured by the quiet patience of the pygmy's influence. In this hush of early civilization, the first understanding of morality and consequence began to emerge, unforced and natural. Even the lords watched in their ways. Gwyn observed the humans with distant curiosity, noting how sunlight touched their lives, how they adapted to the rhythms he maintained. Nito, from deep within tombs and shadowed valleys, felt their vulnerability to mortality, yet acknowledged the resilience seeded by the dark soul. Izalith, her experiments ongoing, recognized the sparks of creativity and adaptability emerging within these fledgling mortals, understanding that the flame's generative energy could thrive beyond her immediate intervention. Mortality itself became both teacher and constraint. The first humans learned that each life had boundaries, yet within those boundaries lay freedom. The ability to act, to shape the world incrementally, was tempered by the certainty of endings. Choices mattered precisely because time was finite, and each action could influence not only survival, but the path of legacy. In this way, mortality became a quiet, persistent guide, shaping thought, society, and even culture in subtle and profound ways. And yet, the world was not without peril. The cycles of fire and shadow, the flicker of the first flame, introduced instability alongside possibility. Volcanic eruptions, storms, and predatory beasts tested fledgling humans. Ash drifted across valleys from Izalith's experiments. Disease and decay lingered from Nito's dominion. These challenges were neither punitive nor arbitrary, but essential. Mortality demanded adaptation, ingenuity, and caution. The first humans learned through trial, endurance, and quiet reflection, guided always by the imperceptible hand of the dark soul. Through these trials, humanity began to understand itself in relation to the world. They recognized brilliance and danger, growth and decay, creation and destruction. The first flame's flicker, once subtle, became mirrored in the rhythms of their own lives. With every spark of fire they kindled, with every decision that shaped survival, they participated in the eternal cycles established by the Lords. light, shadow, and quiet multiplicity were no longer abstract principles. They were woven into the very fabric of human existence. The inheritance of the dark soul, though small and unseen, empowered mortals to navigate the world of the lords with patience and wisdom. Each spark within them carried memory and potential. They learned not only to endure, but to influence, to shape their surroundings incrementally, and to respect the rhythm of the first flame. In this quiet, unassuming way, humanity began its long journey, destined to inherit the flickering fire, the certainty of death, and the infinite possibilities of choice. Thus, the first humans arose, humble yet profound, fragile yet resilient, carrying within them the inheritance of mortality and the potential for greatness. They were the first to walk knowingly in the cycles of light, shadow, creation, and endings, learning the rhythm of the world not through spectacle, but through quiet endurance and subtle insight. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. The first humans awaken, inheriting fragments of the dark soul. Mortality teaches them endurance, choice, and subtle wisdom, even as they navigate a world shaped by the flickering first flame and the domains of the lords. Soft forward tease. Yet as humanity grows, the fragility of the flame becomes ever more apparent, and the world itself begins to signal the need for protection, sacrifice, and renewal. As humanity emerged, guided subtly by the dark soul, the first flame, now flickering more noticeably, demanded attention from the lords. Its brilliance, once steady and commanding, wavered, threatening the balance they had each quietly maintained. It was a moment of subtle urgency. The age of fire, so carefully nurtured, risked collapse. And in this hush of contemplation, the first great linking of the flame began. Gwyn, aware that the flame would not endure without intervention, made a decision steeped in both courage and inevitability. To preserve the light that had illuminated cities and inspired loyalty, he would offer himself, his essence, to the flame. It was not a choice made lightly, nor without awareness of consequence. By sacrificing the brilliance of his own soul, he sought to sustain the cycles of light, shadow, creation, and mortality, to maintain the rhythm of the world for the mortals who now walked beneath the flicker of fire. The act of linking was profound, yet silent. Gwyn approached the first flame, his radiance dimming softly as he extended his will, infusing the waning fire with the warmth and consistency of his own being. The flame pulsed in response, small embers swelling into a steady glow, reassuring in its quiet continuity. The act was not triumphal. It was solemn, deliberate, and suffused with awareness that every moment of brilliance carries the inevitability of loss. Elsewhere, Nito observed with quiet understanding, death, which he presided over with patience, acknowledged the sacrifice not as an imposition, but as a necessary part of the world's rhythm. Even endings, when intertwined with generosity and foresight, could preserve balance rather than simply impose cessation. The first flame, renewed by Gwyn, would continue to illuminate paths and inspire survival, extending the interplay of cycles across the world. Izalith, deep within her sanctums, sensed the subtle shift. Her experiments, dependent upon the constancy of fire, now found renewed stability. Sparks that had faltered regained their rhythm. Trees and stones, shaped by her careful manipulations, held form more reliably. The act of linking, though centered upon Gwyn, rippled outward, reaffirming the generative potential she sought to cultivate. Creation, fragile as it was, could endure a little longer. Even the furtive pygmy and the first humans felt the impact, though imperceptibly at first. Mortals, their hearts carrying fragments of the dark soul, found the flicker of uncertainty softened. The flame's warmth, extended through Gwyn's sacrifice, provided the subtle assurance that mortality could be endured, that choice mattered, and that the cycles of light, shadow, creation, and death would continue to guide existence. The inheritance of potential, now steadied by deliberate intervention, encouraged resilience and subtle wisdom. The first linking of the flame was more than a simple act of preservation. It introduced a principle that would recur across ages. The endurance of fire requires both sacrifice and stewardship. Brilliance, though commanding, cannot sustain itself. It depends upon foresight, awareness, and deliberate attention. The lords, individually powerful, understood that true dominion often rests in restraint and care, in the quiet decision to preserve rather than consume. to guide rather than dominate. Mortals, in their fledgling societies, would eventually witness echoes of this principle. Legends of the Lord's sacrifice would be remembered, reshaped, and retold. Though details would fade, the essence remained. Continuity requires both vigilance and generosity, and endurance is born from deliberate acts of care and courage. In the hush of understanding the pattern of the world, cycles of light, shadow, creation, and mortality was reinforced, extending both opportunity and challenge to the generations that followed. In this way, the first linking of the flame was a moment of both preservation and quiet transformation. It affirmed that light can endure when guided by awareness, that mortality can be reconciled with brilliance, and that even the smallest inheritance, like the dark soul in human hearts, is strengthened when the cycles are tended. The age of fire continued, steadied not only by the flame itself, but by the deliberate choices of those who understood the weight of stewardship. And so, the world entered a period of calm continuity. Anor Londo gleamed a little longer. Naito's tombs remained patient. Izalith's experiments found renewed stability, and the first humans, guided subtly by the dark soul, inherited a world in which the flickering flame could persist. The cycles of light and shadow, creation and mortality, endured through both power and quiet sacrifice, a rhythm as delicate and persistent as the hush of dawn over stone and mist. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. Gwyn links himself to the first flame, extending its warmth and ensuring the continuation of cycles. The lords, mortals, and the dark soul all benefit, establishing a rhythm of endurance, sacrifice, and stewardship. Soft forward tease. Yet even the strongest acts carry unforeseen consequences, and the balance of the flame will eventually be tested by ambition, error, and the unpredictable nature of creation itself. The first linking of the flame, solemn and deliberate, restored light and warmth to the world, yet it carried consequences that rippled beyond the immediate moment. Gwyn's sacrifice was both profound and necessary, but the act of giving a portion of his essence to the flame introduced subtle shifts in balance, imperceptible at first, yet significant across the lands and the lives that depended upon them. Anor Londo, once steadfast under Gwyn's unwavering brilliance, began to exhibit minor falters. Light lingered, yet shadows grew longer at the edges of spires and plazas. Mortals walking through the city sensed, without understanding, that the very fire that guided them relied upon vigilance, and that even divine protection carried its limits. The first humans, their hearts imbued with the dark soul, observed patterns of endurance and fragility, learning that even the most brilliant of powers can diminish over time. Nito, in his tombs beneath the mountains, noted subtle shifts in the rhythms of decay. While death continued its inevitable progression, the extended life of fire altered its cadence. Bones remained undisturbed longer, the soil settled more slowly, and the quiet patience that Nito embodied required a minor adaptation. Endings, once immediate in their inevitability, became entwined with the persistence of light. Mortals living and dying within these cycles sensed a rhythm both comforting and fragile, understanding that the world's patterns depended on careful tending. Izalith's experiments, too, felt the subtle strain. Creation and transformation relied upon steady fire, yet the linked flame introduced energy not entirely under her control. Sparks danced with new intensity, sometimes scattering unpredictably, reminding her that even the most careful attempts at mastery carry risk. From these minor disturbances, lessons emerged. Creation is never separate from consequence, and ambition, however well-intentioned, interacts with forces that may not yield entirely to understanding. The first humans, their lives intertwined with these subtle forces, learned to navigate the uncertainty of an extended flame. Mortality, once an immediate teacher, became interwoven with the persistence of light. Their resilience was tested in new ways. Rivers altered slowly, storms arrived without warning, and the land itself carried echoes of the flame's partial instability. Yet through observation, cooperation, and the quiet guidance of the dark soul, humans adapted. Small communities developed rituals to honor both life and death, light and shadow, embedding these lessons into the very foundation of early civilization. The linking of the flame also introduced a broader temporal consequence. The cycle of the world became a slow decline. The age of fire, though temporarily stabilized, now bore the quiet imprint of mortality and impermanence. Brilliance, once steady, would fade in time. Creation, though nurtured, would falter. Endings would persist, yet their rhythm would intertwine with residual warmth and light. The pattern was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet inexorable. All things would bend toward change, and the world itself would gradually shift toward decline, however gently, however quietly. Even Gwyn, in his chosen state of fusion with the flame, experienced transformation. His form, luminous and commanding, softened in hue and intensity, a gentle reminder that even divine essence is subject to the cycles it seeks to preserve. Through his sacrifice, he sustained not only fire, but awareness, that brilliance alone cannot endure, and that stewardship requires both foresight and acceptance of inevitable diminishment. Thus, the first decline began, not as a catastrophe, but as a quiet, measured adjustment in the world's rhythm. Mortals, the lords, and the pygmies' subtle inheritance all participated in the pattern. Each action, each choice, each survival and failure contributed to the ongoing stability and fragility of the Age of Fire. The cycles became more complex, interwoven, and delicate, teaching that endurance is both gift and responsibility, and that the continuation of brilliance demands attentiveness to subtle forces often unseen. The hush of the world, previously filled with certainty, now carried a whisper of impermanence. Mortals learned patience, restraint, and foresight. The First Lords understood that their power, however great, cannot act without consequence, and even the furtive pygmy, quiet as always, recognized that his inheritance of potential must adapt to a world where fire flickers, decay persists, and creation teeters on the brink of unpredictability. In this quiet transformation, the first lessons of the flame's fragility emerged. Light endures through sacrifice, decay persists through patience, creation survives through careful stewardship, and mortality teaches the resilience that sustains life. The world, balanced delicately between brilliance and shadow, learned the first rhythm of decline, a gentle reminder that even moments of triumph carry within them the seeds of change, imperceptible yet inexorable, calm yet unyielding. And so, the first linking of the flame both preserved and transformed the world. It extended the Age of Fire, yet introduced cycles of subtle instability. Mortals and immortals alike observed, endured, and adapted, understanding through quiet experience that every act, no matter how monumental, carries both benefit and consequence, brilliance and diminution, warmth and shadow. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. The first linking of the flame preserves light but introduces subtle decline. Mortals, the lords, and the inheritance of the dark soul all feel the quiet consequences, learning patience, foresight, and the interwoven rhythm of cycles. Soft forward tease. And as decline continues, the world approaches a moment of reckoning when ambition and fragility will collide, testing the endurance of the flame itself. Time, gentle and unyielding, continued its quiet progression. The first flame, stabilized through Gwyn's deliberate sacrifice, remained steady for a season, yet its subtle flicker persisted. With each passing century, imperceptible variations in its warmth and intensity began to ripple across the world, touching mortals, the lords, and the lands themselves. The Age of Fire, once seemingly eternal, now bore evidence of fragility, patterns of brilliance intertwined with hints of decay, potential for creation shadowed by the inevitability of impermanence. Humans, inheritors of the dark soul, were the first to sense this subtle shift. Their mortality, once a constant guide, now intersected with the vulnerability of the flame itself. Fires they kindled for warmth or craft burned irregularly, tending themselves in ways both predictable and strange. Crops and rivers, shaped by careful observation, began to reveal minor inconsistencies. Survival required heightened awareness, quiet adaptability, and patience, the same virtues nurtured by the furtive pygmy in the earliest moments of life's inheritance. Yet with imperfection came opportunity. Humans learned the first lessons of struggle, that endurance demands foresight, that adaptation carries wisdom, and that even small choices can resonate across the world. These early societies, fragile yet resilient, began to shape culture and ritual around their awareness of mortality and the flame's subtle wavering. They honored light and shadow, creation and decay, embedding in ceremony and craft a rhythm that mirrored the cycles they observed. In this quiet fashion, struggle became both teacher and measure of potential. The flame itself, though sustained, began to fragment in influence. Its brilliance no longer radiated uniformly, leaving certain regions warmer, others cooler. Some hearts inspired, others cautious. Izalith's experiments, once guided by steady fire, now displayed unpredictable tendencies. Sparks intended to foster growth occasionally faltered, and flames meant to sustain life sometimes consumed their own surroundings. Creation, beautiful yet delicate, demanded constant attention and adaptation, reminding all observers that even power meticulously cultivated is subject to impermanence. Gwyn, his essence bound to the flame, perceived the first fractures with quiet concern. Each flicker that waned or shifted echoed through the cycles he had sought to stabilize. He understood that the endurance of light requires both sacrifice and vigilance, yet even his will could not restore perfect constancy. The rhythm of the world, intricate and interwoven, demanded attention not only from brilliance, but from subtle stewardship across many domains. Nito, ever patient in his dominion over death, sensed the slow interweaving of instability. Mortality and decay remained present, yet the world's subtle fractures introduced a new layer of unpredictability. The first humans, navigating both life and the flickering light, learned that endings could arrive in unexpected ways, often mediated by the delicate balance between cycles of fire and shadow. In this quiet tension, mortality gained new significance, teaching both reverence and careful consideration. Even the furtive pygmy, observing from the periphery, recognized the significance of subtle disruption. The dark soul within humanity, capable of multiplying and adapting, now faced conditions shaped by impermanence in the flame itself. Mortals would need resilience not only in life, but in perception, action, and wisdom. Their struggle would be long and layered, guided as much by inherited potential as by immediate circumstance, a delicate interplay of choice and endurance. The world's fracturing also revealed the first seeds of ambition and error. Humans began to experiment, to assert influence over fire, land, and survival. Some acts succeeded, fostering communities, innovation, and understanding. Others failed, producing disaster or collapse, subtle yet instructive. These early trials taught that the persistence of brilliance requires stewardship, that even small acts carry consequence, and that life, while fleeting, gains significance through attentive care and deliberate action. Through these quiet struggles, a pattern emerged. The flame's fragility inspired both ingenuity and caution. Mortality guided endurance, and the inheritance of the dark soul endowed humans with capacity to learn, adapt, and endure. The age of fire persisted, sustained by the sacrifice of the lords, yet it now bore a soft acknowledgement of impermanence. The first recognition that cycles, however carefully maintained, inevitably invite challenge, adaptation, and struggle. Thus, humanity's path began to entwine fully with the world's rhythms. The flicker of the first flame, the sacrifices of the lords, and the multiplicity of the dark soul created a subtle yet profound stage for growth, endurance, and struggle. Mortals, attuned to impermanence, learned the quiet art of persistence. Their lives, measured against the cycles of fire and shadow, became a testament to patience, adaptability, and the resilience necessary to navigate both brilliance and fragility. The age of fire, though enduring, now carried a subtle duality. Light and shadow intertwined, creation and decay danced together, and humanity's struggle would echo these cycles in each choice, each survival, and each act of careful stewardship. The world was fragile, yes, yet fertile, imperfect, yet imbued with potential, fleeting, yet enduring through the quiet rhythm of cycles. Recap marker for sleepy listeners: the flame, though preserved, begins to fracture subtly. Humans inherit the challenge of navigating mortality, the flicker of fire, and the balance of cycles, learning endurance, adaptability, and the profound art of quiet struggle. Soft forward tease, yet with this fragility comes temptation and error, as even the most subtle ambition may imperil the delicate balance of light, shadow, and creation. Within the quiet cycles of fire and shadow, Izalith labored with determination. Her experiments, delicate and profound, sought to replicate the first flame, to generate new brilliance that might reinforce the world and expand creation. For a time, her work bore promise, sparks that danced predictably, life shaped with precision, and fire that kindled growth in lands touched by her hand. Yet the subtleties of power are easily misunderstood, and the flame itself, though sustained by Gwyn, carried fragility that even the lords could not fully perceive. The moment of catastrophe was not sudden, nor heralded by alarm. It began as a quiet shift, a spark that scattered unpredictably, a flame that burned hotter than intended, a pattern disrupted in ways too subtle to notice at first. Izalith, deeply immersed in her experiments, observed the anomalies with increasing unease. The fire she had hoped to shape now moved with agency, consuming her carefully arranged creations and spilling beyond her control. She attempted restraint, modulation, and subtle redirection, yet the intrinsic instability of creating from fragments of the first flame proved insurmountable. In a hush of understanding, Izalith realized that creation without the guiding steadiness of the original flame carried risk. Her power, vast and determined, could not replicate the cycles established by Gwyn's sacrifice. Sparks meant to nurture life now multiplied unpredictably, merging with the elemental chaos of the world, consuming forests, reshaping land, and birthing entities not intended by her designs. The subtle rhythm of cycles, light, shadow, creation, mortality, was disrupted, giving rise to a new form of entropy, the corrupted fire. The catastrophe of Izalith, though violent in consequence, unfolded with a quiet inevitability. Her domain, the lands that had flourished under careful shaping, now became a place of volatile heat, ash, and transformation. Mortals nearby witnessed the aftermath with a mixture of awe and dread, unaware of the intricate causality behind the chaos. The flicker of the first flame, now intersecting with corrupted fire, became a lesson in humility. Brilliance without restraint is fragile, creation without awareness is perilous, and even the most profound intent may yield unpredictable consequence. Nito and Gwyn perceived the consequences differently. Nito, ever patient in his dominion over death, observed the spread of chaos with measured acknowledgement. Life altered and ended in ways previously unforeseen, yet decay continued its rhythm, absorbing the corrupted energy into the patient cycles of mortality. Gwyn, luminous and tethered to the first flame, perceived the disruption with sorrow. The stability he had worked to preserve now faced perturbation, and the lesson was clear. Even divine intervention cannot fully prevent the unpredictable interactions of power, will, and circumstance. Humans, whose fledgling societies were already adapting to mortality and the fragility of the flame, now confronted indirect consequences of the catastrophe. Lands that had once been fertile burned, rivers shifted unexpectedly, and small communities were forced to adapt or perish. The inheritance of the dark soul, subtle yet enduring, provided guidance. Mortals learned resilience through necessity, endurance through observation, and ingenuity through quiet reflection. Even amidst disruption, the cycles of life, shadow, and choice persisted, teaching patience and measured understanding. The corrupted fire itself became a motif of duality. It embodied the potential for creation and transformation, yet simultaneously, the peril of unbridled ambition. Sparks from Izalith's catastrophe drifted unpredictably, reshaping landscapes, warping life, and spreading influence across regions distant from her domain. Mortals who observed or interacted with these remnants encountered both opportunity and risk, learning early that power, while seductive, requires careful stewardship, and that brilliance without awareness is inherently fragile. Within this quiet catastrophe, the principles of cycles were reinforced. The first flame, sustained yet flickering, continued to influence mortality, creation, and decay. Gwyn's sacrifice remained a stabilizing force. Nito's patience absorbed the consequences of chaos, and the furtive pygmy's subtle guidance nurtured human resilience. Yet the world had irrevocably shifted. The age of fire now bore traces of corruption, introducing a long-term tension between brilliance and fragility, creation and decay, opportunity and risk. Izalith herself, transformed by the consequences of her actions, became a symbol of both potential and caution. Her brilliance, once nurturing, now interwove with unpredictability, leaving behind a landscape of beauty and peril alike. Mortals learn to navigate this terrain through observation, patience, and quiet adaptation. The corrupted flame, though dangerous, also carried lessons. It revealed the fragility of even divine power, the necessity of foresight, and the persistent interdependence of creation, mortality, and the cycles that govern the world. Thus, the catastrophe of Izalith stands as both warning and principle. The first flame, though sustained through sacrifice, flickers in constant tension with ambition, mortality, and the unpredictable nature of creation. Humanity, nurtured by the dark soul and tempered by early struggle, learns resilience through adaptation. The cycles of the world, now interwoven with brilliance, shadow, and corruption, continue to shape experience, revealing that even in imperfection, the rhythm of life, death, and endurance endures. The quiet hush of reflection settles over this moment. The lesson is subtle yet profound. Stewardship, patience, and careful attention are required to preserve brilliance. Even the most luminous efforts may falter, and the cycles of light, shadow, creation, and mortality demand reverence, adaptation, and understanding. Through the catastrophe of Izalith, the world learns that the flame, while sustaining, is not infallible, and that every act of creation carries both consequence and opportunity in equal measure. Recap marker. For sleepy listeners, Izalith's attempt to replicate the first flame leads to catastrophe, spreading corrupted fire across the land. Mortals, the lords, and the cycles of life, shadow, and mortality adapt to new instability, learning patience, resilience, and the delicate stewardship of power. Soft forward tease. Yet in the aftermath of corruption, a new understanding begins to emerge, revealing the interplay of sacrifice, consequence, and the enduring inheritance of the dark soul. Time, quiet and unhurried, carried the world forward. The first flame, sustained through Gwyn's sacrifice, yet subtly fractured by both its own fragility and Izalith's catastrophe, began to wane in brilliance across the lands. Shadows stretched further into valleys, mountains, and forests, their hush settling over cities and villages alike. The age of fire, once steady and assured, now entered a period of darkening, a subtle descent in which light persisted, but its warmth was increasingly selective. Mortals, still guided by fragments of the dark soul, adapted to this, dimming with quiet resilience. Their lives, brief and delicate, were framed not only by mortality, but by the recognition that the flame they depended upon was now impermanent. Communities evolved practices of observation and cooperation, honoring cycles of growth, decay, and survival. Ritual, vigilance, and reflection became intertwined, teaching patience, endurance, and the humility of existence in a world whose brilliance flickered more faintly with each passing season. The lords, too, bore the weight of consequence. Gwyn, tethered to the flame, observed the slow fading with somber awareness. The sacrifice that had preserved the cycles now revealed limits. Even a godly essence cannot indefinitely counter the passage of time. Nito, in his quiet domain, continued to weave death's patient pattern, accepting the inevitability of change. The furtive pygmy, always discreet, watched humanity respond to the subtle fracture, recognizing that the inheritance of the dark soul would guide survival, adaptation, and eventually resilience in the face of waning light. Izalith's corrupted fire lingered, a constant reminder that brilliance and ambition are intertwined with fragility. Lands altered, ecosystems shifted, and mortality became both challenge and instruction. Mortals who encountered remnants of her experiments learned caution, observation, and respect for power beyond comprehension. These lessons were embedded quietly in ritual, memory, and the daily rhythm of survival, forming a foundation upon which future generations would navigate a world of both potential and peril. The darkening also reshaped perception of the lords themselves. Once revered as distant embodiments of power, they became examples of the complex interplay between agency, consequence, and stewardship. Gwyn's brilliance preserved cycles but carried the inevitability of diminishment. Nito's patient authority demonstrated that patience can absorb disruption. Izalith's miscalculations revealed the fragile boundary between creation and destruction. Mortals, in observing these examples, gradually absorbed a principle. Power is not only possession, but careful tending, and even the most luminous acts may ripple unpredictably through the cycles of existence. Humanity, slowly increasing in presence and influence, learned subtle mastery over environment, fire, and the rhythm of life. Mortals did not yet fully comprehend the nature of the dark soul, but its inheritance nurtured ingenuity, foresight, and endurance. The lessons of mortality, instability, and careful stewardship became ingrained in communities, guiding interactions with both the land and each other. Survival itself became a quiet art, woven from observation, reflection, and the incremental shaping of circumstance in alignment with cycles of light and shadow. Through these gradual adjustments, the world learned continuity in imperfection. The flame, though waning, continued to provide guidance and inspiration. Mortals endured, the lords persisted, and the cycles of creation, decay, and mortality remained interwoven. The fragility introduced by ambition and the limits of power served as persistent reminder that even the most deliberate acts require humility, foresight, and adaptation. The inheritance of the dark soul, modest yet enduring, became a quiet lodestar for the fledgling civilizations that would one day navigate this complex world. The hush of reflection now settles over the age of fire. The darkening of the world is neither abrupt nor catastrophic. It is a gradual softening, an extended meditation on impermanence. Brilliance persists, yet it demands attentiveness. Mortals, observing both light and shadow, learn that endurance is cultivated not in the presence of certainty, but in the careful navigation of uncertainty. Stewardship, patience, and understanding emerge as subtle but essential motifs, guiding the inheritance of both fire and knowledge across generations. And so, the legacy of the Lords is both luminous and instructive. Gwyn's sacrifice endures as a stabilizing force, yet it reveals the inherent limits of power. Nito's quiet domain embodies patience and acceptance, while Izalith's catastrophe demonstrates the delicate balance between ambition and consequence. Humanity, inheriting the dark soul, absorbs these lessons, learning to navigate mortality, fragility, and the rhythm of cycles with ingenuity, vigilance, and subtle wisdom. The darkening of the world, though measured and quiet, sets the stage for what is to come. Mortals and gods alike perceive the increasing fragility of the flame, yet the inheritance of potential persists. It is in this hush, this gentle tension, that the final threads of consequence, choice, and endurance begin to converge. The age of fire, while waning, remains a space of possibility, reflection, and subtle preparation for the events that will ultimately define both mortality and legacy. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. The world enters a period of darkening as the flame wanes subtly. Mortals, the lords, and the cycles of life, creation, and decay adjust, learning resilience, observation, and the careful stewardship necessary to preserve legacy amid impermanence. Soft forward tease, and as darkness deepens, the time approaches when the choices of mortals and the endurance of the flame will converge, revealing the ultimate balance of fire, shadow, and consequence. The age of fire, once steady and radiant, now approached a quiet conclusion. The first flame, preserved for centuries through Gwyn's deliberate sacrifice, had waned gradually, its brilliance flickering along a spectrum of light and shadow. Mortals, the lords, and even the lingering traces of Izalith's ambition perceived the subtle rhythm of finality. There was no sudden rupture, no abrupt calamity. Rather, the world entered a period of reflective hush, where every flicker of fire and shadow carried weight, and every choice became imbued with enduring consequence. Gwyn, tethered to the flame, recognized the inevitability of transition. His essence, once sufficient to sustain brilliance, now interfaced delicately with both the cycles of the world and the inherent fragility of light itself. In this quiet twilight, the principles of stewardship, sacrifice, and foresight were affirmed. Even divine acts must contend with impermanence, and even the most deliberate choices ripple through the interconnected fabric of mortality, creation, and decay. The first flame, though dimming, remained a lodestar, guiding reflection, endurance, and the careful navigation of consequence. Mortals, having inherited fragments of the dark soul, now faced the culmination of centuries of subtle guidance and struggle. They had learned to observe cycles, adapt to impermanence, and cultivate resilience. Communities had developed rituals, practices, and wisdom that reflected the fragile balance of the flame. Each action, though small in the grand tapestry of time, resonated across generations, demonstrating that even in waning light, deliberate choice carries enduring weight. The inheritance of the dark soul, subtle yet persistent, ensured that humanity's capacity for endurance, ingenuity, and reflection would continue to shape the world. The catastrophe of Izalith lingered as a persistent motif. Corrupted fire, unpredictable and transformative, served as both caution and principle. It reminded all observers that ambition without restraint, brilliance without foresight, and creation without patience inevitably generates disruption. Yet within the chaos lay opportunity. Mortals learned to navigate uncertainty, to harness potential while respecting limits, and to discern the delicate equilibrium between brilliance and fragility. In this quiet observation, the world absorbed the lesson that enduring power and wisdom are inseparable, and that resilience is cultivated through reflection, patience, and careful action. Nito, the eternal custodian of death, observed with quiet satisfaction the cycles that now unfolded. Mortality continued to teach, even in the diminishing glow of fire. Life persisted through vigilance, adaptation, and humility. Death, while inevitable, was not arbitrary. It was woven into the cycles of survival, growth, and reflection. The persistence of mortality provided structure, a natural rhythm that aligned with the waning flame, reinforcing the understanding that all cycles, light and shadow, creation and decay, are interdependent, delicate, and instructive. The darkening of the world, once gradual, now carried clarity. Mortals, reflecting upon the inheritance of choice and the consequences of prior actions, understood that the age of fire, though fading, had cultivated enduring principles. Brilliance, while impermanent, had illuminated patterns of stewardship and sacrifice. Shadow, while persistent, had taught patience and reflection. Mortals, endowed with fragments of divine potential and tempered by adversity, were now prepared to navigate a world where light, shadow, and consequence coexisted in constant interplay. Gwyn's final understanding of the flame mirrored the broader lesson for all. Every act of preservation, every deliberate intervention, carries both benefit and limitation. Even divine sacrifice cannot fully prevent decline, yet it can guide cycles, impart wisdom, and extend opportunity. Mortals, in learning to recognize these rhythms, inherit not only the consequences of previous choices, but also the capacity to make their own decisions with awareness, patience, and understanding. The world, though dimming, remains fertile with potential, shaped by reflection, endurance, and quiet courage. Izalith's legacy, intertwined with the persistence of corrupted fire, serves as enduring counsel. Ambition and creation must be measured against consequence and restraint. Nito's domain exemplifies patience and absorption of change. Gwyn's sacrifice exemplifies foresight and stewardship. Mortals, observers and inheritors of these interwoven principles, learn that brilliance endures only when guided with care. Shadow instructs reflection, and mortality cultivates wisdom. The cycles of fire, shadow, life, and decay, once fragmented and subtly disrupted, converge in a quiet understanding of balance, preparation, and enduring legacy. In the hush of the final age of fire, the world achieves synthesis. Mortals walk through lands shaped by brilliance and shadow, death and life, creation and imperfection. The flame, though waning, persists as both illumination and metaphor. It represents the potential for endurance, the necessity of reflection, and the interdependence of choice and consequence. The legacy of the Lords, tempered by fragility and enriched by the inheritance of the dark soul, provides a foundation upon which humanity may continue to navigate cycles of challenge, adaptation, and subtle triumph. And so, the Age of Fire concludes not in spectacle or abrupt finality, but in the quiet cadence of reflection and continuity. Mortals inherit not only a world of challenge, but a framework of wisdom, to observe cycles, to act with deliberate care, and to recognize that every choice, however small, contributes to the enduring rhythm of existence. The flame, the dark soul, and the legacy of the Lords converge in a gentle equilibrium, a testament to stewardship, resilience, and the persistent art of guiding life, shadow, and potential with measured awareness. Recap marker for sleepy listeners. The Age of Fire ends quietly, guided by Gwyn's sacrifice, Izalith's catastrophe, and Nito's patient cycles, mortals inherit both the fragility and potential of the flame, learning reflection, endurance, and the lasting influence of deliberate choice. Soft forward closure. And in this gentle hush, the cycles of fire, shadow, mortality, and choice continue. A quiet legacy that endures beyond the flicker of light, inviting all who follow to observe, reflect, and persist.